Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, supervillains, and everyone else in Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, Andrea.
Hi, Brian.
We are back, and we are here with a fantastic episode this week. I know that you were maybe a little creeped out by the episode. In our last episode, I could tell you were not necessarily looking forward to the creepy child.
No, I've been avoiding this one. And I'm really into, the episodes that feature villains and monsters and sort of anti-heroes. Mm-hmm. And this one, I don't know. I've seen this episode before. It's got a creepy factor. It's a little bit different. It's about a character we don't know too well in terms of like the Batman universe. This is a villain. I even question whether this is a true villain, which we'll get into.
Right.
But this character is not well known, and she makes us uncomfortable. Yeah. And that's, I don't know, did you feel uncomfortable watching the episode?
A little bit, and we'll certainly get into why. I think it stems
because you hate children.
Got this really. There's this thing about kids. No, seriously. Honestly, I can't wait to get into it. So I think we should. This episode is dedicated to Baby Doll, a character that was created for Batman the Animated Series. So it's not like we've got a great deal of history to go on, but what I loved about this particular episode was that it gave us everything we needed to know about Baby Doll. I mean, basically everything you could possibly be wanting was right here in this episode, Drea.
From the psychological perspective, from the history, understanding her past, understanding the trajectory from A to B. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got this character, Mary Doll. She was a child actress and was one of those child stars that, along with a catchphrase, just took the world by storm and then was never quite the same once that show disappeared.
She was born with systemic hypoplasia, a rare condition that kept her from aging.
So to visualize this for folks who haven't seen the episode, her character is sort of like a Shirley Temple.
Yes.
That's immediately what I thought of.
Yes.
She's very cute and has these little phrases, and everybody on the show loves her. Everybody on the show she's on loves her, and she just draws the attention. Everybody in the audience loved her because she was so adorable. And yet she's not like Shirley Temple in the sense that she's actually, at the time that her show was airing, she was an adult in essentially what looks like a child's body.
Yeah, she really hadn't aged basically since, the age of 5. But she was also one of those child actresses that desperately wanted to step out of the role for which she was most famous. And it didn't work. I mean, she's one of those people that was instantly typecast. I mean, we have to think about about real life actors like Gary Coleman or Emmanuel Lewis. When you've got Arnold or you've got Webster, and all you can see them in for their entire adult lives are those characters, it's very hard to see them as anything else, and you don't want to see them performing in Macbeth.
What? Will these hands never be clean? Here's the smell of the blood still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh.
You can't blame her for sort of going off the deep end. In this particular episode, we find that she is kidnapping her old family from her old sitcom family. And she is bringing them back to the set where they were once happiest. And she's basically trying to get them to recreate those characters. Now, they've moved on from this series a long time ago. They've aged. Her siblings, her cousin, they have aged beyond this role. in Love That Baby.
Love that baby.
And it's not, I mean, I want to make it clear that it's not as if those individual people, bullied her or tormented her, harassed her. It's not that there's like this bad blood between them and she's trying to get revenge. Certainly there's this tension around her. Mm-hmm. As soon as the family members get together, it's very clear that they don't feel like a family. They don't feel like she's a family member with them.
Sure.
And meanwhile, she's sort of forcing them to be in this weird performance / relationship where she's insisting they treat her as a baby. She's insisting that, they say the same lines and that they're kind of recreating this really haunting depiction of what they used to be on the show.
Yeah.
So it's really horrifying for them. And it doesn't make sense to them because, again, it's not like they've hurt her. It's not like they're responsible for the pain that she's in.
Well, and one of them she holds responsible.
In the last season, the show's ratings began to drop, so the producers introduced a new character, Baby's little cousin Spunky.
Dahl was furious that she was upstage on her birthday episode.
He was the Raven Simone of the Cosby Show. When Rudy's getting a little too old, they bring in a younger, cuter kid. They did the same thing in Growing Pains, famously. They do that with all kinds of TV series where the little kid that was adorable is no longer adorable because they're getting older, so they bring in another adorable little kid. And I don't know if Paul had anything to do with this, but I just have to bring up the fact that as we were looking at the credits at the end of the episode, one of the characters, this was not an accident, one of the characters, Brian Daly, was played by a gentleman by the name of Robbie Rist. Drea, you may not remember who Robbie Rist was.
No.
He was known for a little character by the name of Cousin Oliver. If you were a fan of the Brady Bunch growing up, Cousin Oliver was the character they brought in order to, make cute kids again.
Right.
Because the kids had grown up to be teens. They weren't cute anymore. At least of all the people I know, Cousin Oliver wasn't particularly well liked. I mean, he was basically the Scrappy-Doo of the Brady Bunch. But that character, led to what eventually became known as Cousin Oliver syndrome, which was all these sitcoms then bringing in cute kids once the cute kids had grown up.
Right.
So Robbie Rist, who played Cousin Oliver, then played one of the characters who got kidnapped by Baby Doll in this episode.
Wow. That had to be intentional, right? Like that was...
there's no way it was an accident because he's not appeared in any of the previous episodes, none that I remember anyway. But I saw the name and I'm like, that's Cousin Oliver. And then it clicked. I was just like, oh my God, Robbie Rist, Cousin Oliver.
Everybody loved Baby Doll until you came along. You made them forget me.
It seems as though, yes, she's focusing on him, but they're all in peril. Like it sounds as if her overall plan here is to harm every single person in the process of recreating, this kind of horrific family reunion.
Mm-hmm. This episode is really more about Baby Doll herself. And I'd like to focus on her. I would also like to focus on her henchmen, because she has henchmen. She has one hench lady in particular that I would like to ask you questions about. And then, Drea, I'm actually going to jump on your side, maybe for this one episode. And I'm going to say that this particular episode has what might be the most empathic moment I've ever seen Batman have in this animated series. So, Dre, let's talk about Baby Doll. She's a young woman who has basically had her growth stunted since the age of 5. She is growing up mentally. Her body is not aging. What can you tell me about someone who will perpetually be seen as a child? not just figuratively, but literally to the world around her?
Well, we sort of have to think of it in a more general way first. Like, think about anything about your appearance, about your visible identity that you can't change. And as much as you may not identify with that characteristic or those characteristics, that's how people define you. That's how they create their own expectations and biases. That's how they essentially, that's what shapes their behavior toward you and their interactions. So in many ways, what she can't control, her appearance, her lack of physical maturity, really impacts the perception of her identity.
Right.
And we know that inside she feels like an adult, right? Like her voice in the episode, we actually hear her use her real voice, which is an adult voice. And yet for some reason, she prefers to go into her like presentation baby voice, her acting baby voice.
Sorry, I had to play rough, Tippy. I didn't mean to.
Especially when she's trying to, successfully manipulate somebody or get something from somebody. And she's learned that voice coupled with her visible appearance ends up being more effective for her.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, we also see her struggle with that because she doesn't feel aligned with her outward appearance. She's an adult person, and yet the world is treating her like a child, or the world sees her as this weak, ineffective, small, diminutive person. And it's kept her from, it's created a lot of barriers for her. And so that impacts the way that she sees herself. So I think that if we look at it kind of in that context of there's a lot of disequilibrium between her self-perception and then the world's perception, that creates a lot of turmoil and conflict for her psychologically, right?
Right.
Now, it doesn't excuse the kinds of things that she does to people, especially in this episode, but it kind of creates the context for why there's so much pain there, because she's sort of stuck in that character and almost, unwittingly has to be that person when I would say that she doesn't authentically feel that way. So when you're not feeling like your authentic self, it's really, like I said, it creates a lot of turmoil. It creates a lot of psychological pain. And that's something to think about when we look at her behavior.
Now, something you just said makes me think about something she says when she breaks down and she uses her real voice.
Over the years, I remembered how happy I was with all of you around me and the folks at home watching me each week. Me.
Baby doll. Now I'm baby for good and everyone will love me again. Hugs, hugs.
Her real desire, though she doesn't necessarily want to go back to the lifestyle of having been and love that baby.
Love that baby.
She does want to go back and experience life when she was happiest, or at the very least happy. And talk a little bit about that, trying to recapture those moments of happiness, even if it means others around you suffering, holding on to those glory memories.
Well, I think that's a metaphor for social maturity in a way, that what her goals are in life, generally speaking, aren't that different than ours as we mature. In terms of our personhood, I talked a little bit about identity, but also in terms of our social functioning and our social successes. So for instance, typically we want to have close bonds. We want to have bonds with peers. We want to be in romantic relationships. We want to generate families. And, I mean that in the broadest sense, like couple with people, have a home, have a family, have a community, social connectedness in whatever way that's fulfilling for somebody. Now those are signs of social maturity. There are additional things like employment, occupational and career-related success, financial success, more materialistic types of things.
Well, but you bring up an interesting point. She can't have any of those.
Exactly.
Like, she has no career. She has no financial success. She cannot mature because basically the world won't let her. So
Exactly.
Is this her fault?
It's not necessarily her fault, but what I'm saying is that her inability to get to those things, to reach those, that, you know, to move through that social maturity and those milestones is really impacting her psychological state. And so she's finding that in order to have those things, she has to create it. She has to fabricate it with bringing these individuals who she knows that they were a quote unquote family with her before, right, on the show. So she brings these individuals together. She, creates this fake set with kitchen and dining room table and everything that sort of creates this home setting. And, you know, everyone's pretty disturbed by it,
Right.
but this is the closest she's going to get to feeling that fulfillment.
Now, something that I find myself wondering about is her catchphrase.
I didn't mean to.
This is basically giving this 5-year-old character in this TV show permission to do anything and everything she wants because she can just be adorable in the end and say, I didn't mean to. Now, grown-up Mary Doll is doing the exact same thing. She is blowing things up. She is kidnapping people. She is doing things that she clearly should not be doing, very illegal things, very harmful things to some people. And she has kept that catchphrase. Now, I realize she's basically trying to be that character, but talk about that. How important is it to an actor or an actress at that age to be brought up with that kind of mentality of, as long as I'm adorable, I can get away with anything?
Well, I think that's how they've been socialized in many ways, right? If you think to the shows you mentioned, it's funny. This is reminding me of the other. There's another phrase that was very popular in the early '90s, around the same time, about fault.
Oh,
that I'm not
talking
gonna say.
about-
I'm just not gonna say it. But
You're talking about the Urkel, aren't you?
I am. But that was also. It was so catchy, and it was so, in his case.
I don't know which one you're talking about, though. Which of his catchphrases are you referring to? Which
There's
'cause
multiple
catchphrases.
catchphrases?
He had several of them as the show went forward. Which one are you specifically thinking of?
The one referring to whether he's at fault for a particular situation.
No, I don't remember that one. Is that one of the first ones?
Yeah.
Which one is it?
It's like, was he responsible for things going wrong?
I didn't. Was it high pitched? Like so many of you? Go ahead and.
No, I'm
go
not.
ahead and,
I'm not. I mean, you're the one who does voices. You should just do it.
Did I do that? What?
Please don't put that on the show. I'm not
but-
going to go to the psychology of Urkel.
No, but come on. But that is an interesting point as well, because Jaleel White, after playing Urkel for that long, then did everything he could to get out of that role. You've got Gary Coleman, who did everything he could to get out of that role. In fact, famously, right up until his death, he was refusing to even say the line, "What you talking about, Willis?" Like there would be people who would ask him on the street, and he got very resentful of that. Emmanuel Lewis has made it very clear that while he still acts occasionally, basically he's moved on. He's got other businesses. He's doing other things. He's got a record label.
Webster, the kid who
Webster.
was Webster. What was his catchphrase?
Well, he didn't really have a catchphrase, but I'm talking about the fact that these actors. I mean, look at Miley Cyrus today. She very clearly needed to get out of the Hannah Montana. Meanwhile, you've got this character who is driving back to that character. Like, you know, that character gave her everything. So she's sort of the antithesis of what tends to happen with child actors desperately needing to get out of those roles.
Well, for the most part, because now you have the recreations, like the Fuller House type movements, where we all want to see the reunions and we all want to see them come back. And so I think there's ways to capitalize on 80s and 90s child star catchphrases and personalities and whatnot.
But who of the Fuller House cast members are the ones that didn't want to come back?
Those two twins.
Right. See, like
we can't even say their names because they will sue us.
The young, cute ones are the ones that are like desperate to be like, look, that's not who I am. That's not what I was. You know, like, you know, I find it interesting that Baby Doll is basically trying to grasp those glory years where most child actors would try desperately to leave those things behind.
Well, she did for some time.
Yeah.
She went for other roles and she tried to separate from that character. But unlike the real actors we're talking about, the real child actors who eventually grew up, she had this, you know, she had this physiological barrier. She wasn't able to develop into an adult physically. And so she had to she sort of had to take that and adjust based on that barrier. And in a way, it's like she's sort of lashing out with resentment to others because of that, because of being stuck or trapped.
So let's talk about this loneliness that she refers to at the end of the episode. And it is a very heartbreaking moment because she basically breaks down, like so many episodes do. It ends in an amusement park in Gotham City. You almost expect the Joker to turn around the corner at any given moment because clearly they must be on his turf. But the episode ends in Funland. And it ends in a hall of mirrors. And at one point, she turns and sees herself as exactly she would probably be if she were 30 years old. And it is a powerful moment. But then she gets angry and she shoots that mirror as well. She has shot all the mirrors around her because Batman has been in them, and she turns around, she sees herself, and she tears up and she shoots herself in the mirror. That is a phenomenally powerful moment in this episode, much more than I would have expected for a show ostensibly for kids.
Right.
What is she going through in that moment?
Well, when we see her literally reflect on her reflection as an adult woman, you know, tall, blonde lady, long hair, in a dress. I mean, that's sort of what, when we're young girls, that's what we picture ourselves. Not all of us, but that's what society tells us we should be. That's what we project into our future. How many years did she project that into her future until she realized that's unattainable, that isn't something that I can achieve? And that moment of rejecting that, you know, unfulfilled desire is really heartfelt. I mean, that's really tragic. That's the part that really gets to us, right?
Right.
Is that she's realizing that's unattainable. This is what makes me different than everybody else. You know, this is a rare disorder. I'm alone with it. I'm isolated. I'm rejected because of it. I have no way to reconcile it. And so that's that moment of complete isolation and complete misunderstanding too, because if no one else has this issue, no one else can really validate me and understand me. So it's this deep loneliness, this just existence that's incredibly lonely. And then to see her actual self, you know, the young looking, baby looking self stare back at her, which actually is her authentic representation. is painful to her because, like I said before, she doesn't feel like that's who she is. So there's that, again, that disequilibrium,
Right.
that feeling of being unseen by others or just seen as one thing when that doesn't match your identity. So she rejects that mirror. And then you think about what that means. She has no way to fully experience her authentic self. Right. So she's sort of standing alone in the darkness. Except there's one person who's there, and it's Batman.
And this leads me to that moment where I have to agree with you. Normally we see a big fight, and normally we see Batman throwing somebody into the back of a paddy wagon or leaving them there for Commissioner Gordon to take to Arkham Asylum or to prison or whatever. This episode ends with a very melancholy moment of Baby Doll wrapping her arms around Batman's legs and saying,
I didn't mean to.
and as the camera pulls back, Batman just allows her to hug him. And there are no other words said. And it's sad, but it's also something that leads me to believe that if anyone could understand what she is going through to some degree, it would be Batman.
What do you mean by that? Like, do you mean because, well, first of all, did you want him to like kick her? Like, what would have been his more Batman-esque reaction? I thought it was pretty consistent with what we've seen him do and how he's behaved.
Well, it's an action-adventure show. She's a little 5-year-old girl, or she appears to be. The fight is essentially just him appearing in mirrors and her shooting them out until eventually she has no bullets.
They can't show him punching her,
but he doesn't pick her up. It'd be one of those sorts of shows or movies where Batman just picks her up by the overalls and come on, you're coming with me. You're grounded. Something. There's it would be very easy for an undisciplined writer to have given him a line, like, I think you deserve a spanking, but he didn't. It was all emotional. It was, get it out. Like, I'm here for you. I totally understand what you're going through. Because as a child, I was alone for all this time. Sure, he had Alfred or whatever, but he was suddenly abandoned by his family. He was someone who maybe didn't know how to handle fame and handle stardom as the son of the Waynes, and now in the news for the Waynes having been killed and all of this. And he had to push through all of that and find himself. Now, he was allowed to age, but to some degree, people in Gotham City still see him as Bruce Wayne, billionaire playboy, who is, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He relies on that image.
Yeah, and if we can tie it back to her experience and her inability to successfully achieve the social maturity milestones that we mentioned earlier in the show, right? Having a close bond with a romantic partner, creating a family, having children. Certainly he has a financial comfort. He has a home. He's created a home. He has a relationship with Robin. But there might be, and you could argue with me, but would you say that part of why he relates to her is that he too isn't able to have certain social and even sort of maturity developmental things for himself be fulfilled because of his role as Batman?
Yeah.
Would you then also say that he could relate to her because he too makes mistakes that are aggressive and violent, and he lashes out because he has similar pain?
Yes. But I have a feeling when we come back next week, he'll still be doing the same thing. It's not like looking at the reflection of himself. It's not like looking at baby doll as like, oh, this is what I'm doing too.
No,
like there
no,
isn't.
I just mean that human element.
Sure.
And you mentioned empathy. That's exactly what I mean. That human element of understanding someone's experience versus sympathy. Man, I feel really sorry for this adult trapped in a kid body, baby doll girl. I'm going to let her hug me. I think it's beyond sympathy. I think that you're right about his empathic experience with her, and that, like we said before, she's this lonely and in a very uniquely positioned place where there's no one in the world who understands what she's been through. And I think that he has this connection to that.
Drea, let's talk about her henchmen. Her henchmen help her kidnap other people, but then she's got one particular henchman by the name of Miriam, who is basically the sort of faux mother character. She's the type of person that, when there's a car accident in the middle of the street and Robin picks up this girl who's crying for her mommy, Miriam comes in order to pretend to be mother. Basically, I don't even know where to begin with this one. Is it simply the money? Is it just who does this for this little girl? Or maybe it's someone who's obsessed with Love That Baby back in the day.
It's hey, you might know a little bit about this. It's a super fan who's obsessed with show from the 80s or 90s and wants to collect and gather every artifact and everything that they can acquire.
Look, Fantasy Island will be mine one day. I'm telling you, Fantasy Island will be mine. You were implying that No. That I'm, I know what you're saying, but the way you're putting it is like, I know a little something about becoming super obsessed.
Well, you do, because you interface with fans of multiple shows because of your role at Shout Factory.
Yes.
So, and it's not, I'm not trying to put a negative spin on it at all, but...
No, I totally get what you're saying. It very well may be that the hench people who are under Mary Doll's employ, who are in Mary Doll's employ, very easily could have been fans of this show 20 years ago. But there's something a little messed up about the fact that these people are willing to help this girl do these things.
Well, and here's where we're limited in terms of the psychology of this henchwoman. We aren't really given a history for her. She appears, she's really loyal to Baby Doll, and she doesn't seem to be drugged. She doesn't seem to be under the influence. She seems to willingly engage in violence to protect this person. So it's hard to say why, how they're motivated and why they're doing what they're doing.
Right. Drea, I realize, we often go through scene by scene and talk about all the action beats, and really there aren't that many. This episode is really just a really nice, psychologically driven episode about this girl, this former child star, Mary Louise Doll, a.k.a. Baby Doll, and, Batman's reaction to this character and the world's reaction to this character. I am very interested to see where this goes. What did you think of this episode?
Even though I was a little creeped out by her, I think that this was an episode that had a purpose. I think all the episodes have a purpose, right? But I think if you reflect on, wow, that was really uncomfortable for us watching this, right? Like, I don't know how intentional Deanie was here, but I know that I always had a hard time with this character, and that even rewatching it as an adult, as I said in the intro of the show, I just have this real discomfort. And it probably comes from, sure, there's that element that she's an adult trapped in this sort of creepy, lifelike doll type of persona. But beyond that, the discomfort may come from the tragedy of her loss.
Sure.
The tragedy of her never being able to fulfill, something that most of us can. And I don't say that assuming that most people, I'm not saying people don't have losses and adversity, but the show was written specifically to point out that she's very unique, that this particular disorder is incredibly rare. And so I think a part of the story is about us realizing that there are some people who cannot achieve the personhood that we all do in terms of being able to grow older, being able to go through the phases of development, being able to experiment with education and careers and all those milestones that we can at least approach, right? And so we know for a fact what she has is irreversible or, permanent, right?
Right.
So we know, leaving this episode, that she is essentially stuck in her tragedy, that there is no reconciliation. There's no magic cure.
Sure.
There's recovery, right? There's this sense of she can build something, especially after having this moment with Batman. Maybe there's some hope there. But ultimately, the fundamental conflict that she has is not going to be resolved. And I think that is what makes this episode really, really uncomfortable to digest.
Of course, Paul Dini would be the guy to write an episode like this. I mean, you can, I've said it just about every time we've ever covered a Paul Dini episode. He doesn't just do standard cartoon fare. It's as if Paul Dini is bored by standard cartoon fare. In fact, Drea, have you ever seen, there was a classic movie with Betty Davis and Joan Crawford called Whatever Happened to Betty, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
I can tell you right now, that would be a no.
Well, it's funny because, and Paul is one of these guys that I could see. There are a few other writers that I could see drawing from things like this. Certainly Paul, but our friend David Wise. I could see David Wise drawing from an inspiration like this. I could see Len Wein drawing from an inspiration like this, or even our friend Tom Zoller. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is a magnificent movie, and it's starring Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. And these two women, famously at the time, by the way, and I realize we're sort of going off the rails, but famously, they were arch rivals, basically, in real life. And they starred in this movie together where this woman, Betty Davis, played Jane, who grew up as a young star as a child, as like a vaudevillian star. And her sister, Blanche, then later became a bigger movie star than she could ever achieve. Like suddenly the roles reverse. Blanche becomes this movie star, and Jane tries to run her over in her car. And she, Blanche ends up getting crippled, and Jane basically keeps Blanche in her home as sort of a prisoner. And
Yikes.
it's this child star, who's now basically kidnapped her sister, who can't escape. And it's a fantastic movie, but I've got to think that Paul Dini was thinking of this movie a little bit when he was writing this episode. Just the fact that it's called Baby Doll, and you've got Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And this is a movie from the early 60s. Great movie. You should absolutely check it out.
Fascinating.
This leads me to a question that a fan emailed us. Andrew asks, "Hey Arkham Sessions, one of Baby Doll's driving motivations is that, due to her condition, it is hard for anyone to take her seriously, either as an actress or as an adult. Do you think that this may have impacted her mental development, i.e. she continues to act, speak, and maybe even think like a child because she is filling the child role given to her by her body? Or is she merely acting for the majority of the episode, playing the child so people will underestimate her? I think Baby Doll is similar in a lot of ways to trans people, except rather than have her body run away from her preferred gender when she hit puberty, it prevented her from maturing outwardly as much as she did inwardly.
Okay, so there's a lot there. This listener, I feel like there are several points here that we can speak to. And I really like the beginning of this question around the development of baby dolls. It's kind of like social, cognitive, emotional functioning.
Yeah.
Because I completely agree. And I know we tend to not go into neurobiology a ton on this show, but we understand emotional development and cognitive development as not just this sort of, A to B type of trajectory that you're good to go. You're going to have, this one track and it's going to develop normally. But a lot of more complex interactions, this kind of serve and return to my environment, right? My environment gives me the ability to build neurons, to build tracks down, to have more complex neural activity in my growing, developing brain, right? So what that means is that I need certain things to happen in my environment in order to nourish and activate and essentially grow my brain. Now that's speaking from child development in general, right? That children obviously need the right kind of parenting and enriching environment and so forth. But when that child's growth is limited physically, then the environment is stunted in a way too. And as this listener is pointing out, there's going to be certain limitations about how people interact with her.
Right.
So while we don't have like a brain scan or proof of like underdevelopment there in those areas, I would agree that there are some limitations and potentially some, stunted emotional growth, some difficulty with cognitive development because of the limitations that she's had with her social interactions. It's basically what I'm saying is that in order to achieve those developmental milestones in a normal trajectory, she needs to have what most of us have as we're developing and maturing into adolescence, teenage years.
Right.
Young
so you're
adult
saying
years.
it could be a little bit of both, because he is sort of posing it as an either or scenario where she is either emotionally stunted to almost forever be a 5-year-old, or is she merely acting for the majority of the episode, playing the child so people underestimate her, which she's clearly doing. I mean, there are moments where she is very clearly using the fact that she looks like a child to lure people in to situations. So she has developed to some degree. But what you're suggesting right now, and it's something that I hadn't thought of. In fact, when I read this, I instantly thought, oh, she's just using it to lure people in. But you bring up an excellent point that it can actually be a little of both. She could be emotionally mature, but there are things in that maturity, or there are elements of that maturity that have not caught up to others.
Exactly.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And, we know now that the brain doesn't really fully develop until the early, even mid-20s. And to think about her sort of physiological limitations in the same way that our physical biology interacts with our environment, in the same way that our genetics interact with our environment, those limitations are going to come into play.
Gotcha.
For the second part of this question, relating Baby Doll's experience to a trans person, I think it only works, superficially. Or it only works as a simple metaphor in the sense of, well, right, her physical appearance doesn't match her inner identity. Her authentic identity doesn't match her physical, what her visible
Right.
identity is. And so others treat her in a way that doesn't match her authentic self. And that, yes, that causes this disequilibrium that I'm talking about. That causes that internal conflict. And for a lot of trans persons who experience that disequilibrium, it can be very painful. It can cause a lot of emotional conflict, especially because our society, just like our society expects a person who's 30 to act a certain way, to look a certain way, our society expects gender roles to be a certain way based on the appearance of one's gender. So I can sort of see that link there, but I'm reluctant to equate this disorder
Right.
that this person has to the trans experience, because being trans is not a disorder.
Right.
I think that's where that metaphor just sort of falls flat.
So, Drea, looking back at the episode, as a clinical psychologist who could experience something along these lines, like, for starters, Batman has to leave that room at some point in time, and Baby Doll's probably going to be with him. Where does he take her? Does he take her to Arkham? Does he take her to, well, clearly he takes her to jail, and the judge and the court system decide whether she goes to Arkham or
Right.
to prison. But where should she go, and what should that treatment be? Is it just therapy?
It could be. I think we have to look at what her, what she is stating that she's motivated to do, because she could very well still be motivated to cause harm and to be a danger to society, in which case, especially if she's identifying victims, then yes, absolutely, we would have to consider some kind of special incarceration. But if she feels remorse, if she is able to express some kind of rehabilitation or be interested in rehabilitation, I think we'd be looking at something along the lines of a therapeutic type of service for her. And I think regardless, there should be some type of intervention related to helping her reconcile that authentic self and her physical expression, and in a way try to help her to find her own realistic goals for
Right.
given her situation. And like I said before, while she's in her current medical condition, she's sort of stuck with that, but
Sure.
it's not as if she can't find happiness and joy and find value in some parts of her life.
Drea, I think we need to tell the good listeners where you and I will be this coming weekend. That is Valentine's Day weekend, 2016. You and I are going to be where?
San Diego Comic Fest.
Yes. We did this last year, and it was a great experience. We ended up doing a live show. It is a convention that is founded by one of the original co-founders of San Diego Comic-Con, and he decided he wanted to get back to the roots and do a smaller convention, and it feels like a classic smaller convention. It is not the multimedia frenzy that is Comic-Con, and I think that this place is absolutely fantastic. I loved it last year. I know you enjoyed it last year. I'm looking forward to going back, and we get to go with our family from Fanboy Comics. Barbara and Bryant Dillon are going to be at Comic Fest, so you guys can actually go and see them at their booth, check out their comics, listen to them talk about the different things they do. You absolutely should. But you have a particularly amazing panel that is going to be happening on Saturday.
Yeah, so Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4, we're taking the conventional panel and basically transforming it to a mock trial. And this is done by the wonderful folks known as the Legal Geeks. They are essentially focusing on Bucky Barnes. So it's the trial of the Winter Soldier. In other words, we're prosecuting Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier, aka Captain America's best friend forever. So he's being charged with crimes that we saw in the film Captain America, the Winter Soldier, where he attacked Captain America, he attacked Black Widow, he was essentially planning to murder all these SHIELD members and superheroes. And so he's going to be on the stand, and there are cosplayers who are representing these characters, and then there are psychologists who are the expert witnesses who will attest to whether he was legally insane, whether he knew what he was doing was wrong at the time of his crimes. And so it will be a complete mock trial with a judge, with lawyers.
And we're talking about real...
Yes.
A real judge. I mean, they've
Yes.
got a real judge to be the judge of this mock trial. They also got legal students to come in and be the lawyers for each side.
Right. So there's a real judge, real lawyers, real legal students, and real psychologists, of course. And I believe that there's a jury as well.
Right. So this is going to be awesome. That is Saturday at 2:00. Again, at San Diego Comic Fest. And if you happen to be going, it's in the Garden Salon 1. And then if you're there on Sunday, you can hang out with us as we will be doing another live episode. That will be Sunday. The Arkham Sessions podcast will be recording in the Garden Salon 2 from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Until next week, when we will have all kinds of reports about this Winter Soldier trial and more. I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
I didn't mean to.